Murray N. Rothbard, For a New Liberty, The Libertarian Manifesto, LvMI. Welcome to a captivating exploration of the libertarian worldview presented in For a New Liberty, The Libertarian Manifesto, by Murray N. Rothbard. This summary will take you on a historical journey of libertarianism's roots and its evolution in American politics. Discover the non-aggression axiom at the heart of libertarian beliefs and how it extends to property rights, education, welfare, and the environment. Prepare to delve deep into the philosophical discussions in this book summary that challenges traditional ideas of the state's role in legislating morality, preserving personal liberties, and the possibilities of a privatized society.
The Evolution of Libertarianism. Libertarianism once dominated American politics, with roots in classical liberalism and influential philosophers like John Locke. Early proponents sought to challenge authority, promoting limited government and individual liberties. However, over time, the rise of the Democratic Party, internal divisions over slavery, and the ascension of the statist Republican Party led to the erosion of libertarian values. Despite being overshadowed by socialism, today's Libertarian Party has become America's third-largest political force. In the 17th and 18th centuries, political systems were predominantly authoritative, characterized by centralized power, high taxes, and state monopolies. Enterprising advocates of classical liberalism, who later came to be known as libertarians, sought to challenge these systems. Their mission was to establish a society where political oppression and unnecessary wars were abolished, and the markets flourished without the shackles of central control. America's founding was deeply influenced by the principles of classical liberalism and the works of philosophers like John Locke. Locke's treatises on natural rights and the right to revolt against oppressive governments paved the path for thinkers like John Trenchard and Thomas Gordon. They expounded on Locke's ideas, asserting that states were inherently coercive and tyrannical in their landmark publication, Cato's Letters. Enlightened by the teachings of Locke, Trenchard, and Gordon, America's founding fathers embedded the libertarian ideals of minimal government into the country's formative documents. However, the passage of time witnessed an erosion of these values, giving way to an increasingly powerful central government. Amidst this shift, the Democratic Party emerged, championing the cause of liberty, but was ultimately split over the issue of slavery. The Republican Party rose to ascendancy, advocating for abolition, but simultaneously furthering statist policies that eroded the principles of limited government and free markets. With the growth of socialism in the 19th century, the original libertarian identity as radical and progressive was hijacked, leaving libertarianism on the sidelines. However, libertarianism persevered and the Libertarian Party now stands as the third-largest political force in the United States, symbolizing the enduring spirit of liberty. Unpacking the non-aggression axiom. Libertarians derive their entire belief system from the non-aggression axiom, which asserts that no person or group should initiate or threaten violence against another. This rationale applies not only to physical aggression but also to the violation of private property rights. Property rights extend to various liberties, such as freedom of speech. However, some exceptions arise when an individual's actions infringe upon the rights of others. Surprisingly, libertarians view the state as the primary violator of the non-aggression principle, using manipulative language to disguise morally unjustifiable acts as being for the greater good. Libertarianism is rooted in one fundamental principle, the non-aggression axiom. This simple yet powerful rule posits that no one, whether an individual or group, should initiate or threaten violence against another person or their property. By adhering to this axiom, libertarians navigate complex issues, such as prostitution, by considering whether it involves non-consensual aggression. Private property is a central tenet of libertarianism, as it extends from its owner's body. Therefore, all rights are also property rights. For instance, libertarians understand freedom of speech as the liberty to express oneself while on one's private property, such as in their home or rented assembly hall. Exceptions to property rights do exist, exemplified by the classic case of falsely shouting "fire" in a movie theater. While some may question if this is a breach of free speech, libertarians argue that the offender is violating property rights of both the theater owner and the audience, as they disrupt the contractual agreement made at the time of ticket purchase. The true antagonist in the eyes of libertarians is the state, which routinely engages in aggressive acts that would not be acceptable if performed by private individuals. For example, setting off bombs for any citizen would be considered an act of mass murder, but when executed by the state, it's labeled as war. Through carefully crafted language, the state convinces society that its actions are justified and for the benefit of its people. However, at its core, the state holds a monopoly on aggression, and that's the ultimate challenge for adherents of the non-aggression axiom. Modern slavery unearthed. Libertarians argue that slavery continues to exist in hidden forms, such as mandated military service and taxation, resulting in involuntary servitude. Furthermore, the penal system and how society deals with the mentally ill also contribute to this modern slavery issue. Despite the global illegality of slavery, libertarians assert that it persistently lingers in today's world, manifesting in concealed ways. One such example is conscription, where young American men must enlist in the armed forces, giving them no choice but to risk their lives in service to the state. This is just one demonstration of contemporary slavery in the form of forced labor, which the state regularly imposes. The tax system is another major proponent of involuntary servitude. Income tax, for instance, necessitates everyone to work a certain period of the year without pay, making us all part-time slaves. This form of forced labor is intrinsically unjust, as citizens work for little or no pay. Moreover, the unjust nature of taxation extends to the penal system. While the focus on punishing criminals often incurs financial costs, it is taxpayers, including the very victims of crime, who carry the burden of funding these punishments. Additionally, the jailing of criminal suspects, often prior to a verdict, exemplifies another issue with our system: how it unfairly treats those who may be innocent. The mentally ill are not spared from this modern-day slavery. These individuals can be involuntarily hospitalized under the pretext of being a danger to themselves and others, a notion libertarians vehemently oppose. In their view, confinement should not be based on speculative grounds, that someone with mental illness might one day cause harm, just as it is unjust to jail all teenage males preemptively due to a higher likelihood of crime. Undeniably, forced labor is not the only problem. The state's constant encroachment on our personal liberties further perpetuates this covert existence of slavery in modern society. Morality versus legality in libertarianism. Libertarians distinguish between morality and legality when it comes to individual rights and freedoms. They believe that unless a violation of the non-aggression axiom occurs, the state should not impose any specific moral code on its citizens. This perspective sheds light on issues such as freedom of speech, pornography, and gun ownership. Ultimately, libertarians argue that state intervention in matters of personal morality often infringes upon individuals' freedoms. In the realm of libertarian thought, accepted rights like freedom of speech and freedom of the press are considered part of property rights. Central to this belief is the concept of freedom of the will. For instance, if an individual incites a riot, only those who choose to participate are held responsible for their actions, as they have exercised their free will in committing a crime. While libertarians may acknowledge immoral actions, they maintain that morality and legality are separate spheres. The state, they argue, should not impose any moral views on citizens through legislation. This distinction becomes clear when comparing the conservative and liberal stances on subjects such as pornography. While conservatives may deem it immoral and call for its banning, liberals view it as an expression of healthy sexuality. Nonetheless, both seek to embed their moral beliefs in law. Libertarians, however, see these moral debates as irrelevant and believe the state should not intervene unless the non-aggression axiom is violated. This principle extends to gun ownership as well. Libertarians see the right to self-defense, including with firearms, as a fundamental individual freedom. While liberals may advocate for gun control to protect vulnerable populations, libertarians argue that these very groups, such as African Americans, low-income individuals, and the elderly, need the ability to protect themselves the most. Ultimately, libertarians caution against the state's involvement in legislating morality, asserting that an individual's freedoms are inevitably compromised when moral codes are imposed on them. Unmasking harmful state-run services. Often touted as pillars of society, public education and welfare systems can inflict inadvertent damage upon the communities they aim to serve. The development of public education as we know it today was driven, in part, by forces bent on homogenization and control, rather than benefiting learners. This is evident by the Ku Klux Klan's role in pushing for public schools in the 1920s, and the government's promotion of standardized curriculums that limit individualism and specialization. The privatization of education can offer a broader spectrum of choice, better tailoring to unique student needs and interests. Similarly, welfare systems may propagate dependence, as observed in the 1970s when social welfare and direct welfare spending spiked drastically. These programs often fail to redistribute wealth as intended, benefiting select groups at the expense of other poor, tax-paying citizens. Therefore, it's crucial to acknowledge the damaging consequences of state-run services like public education and welfare, and consider alternative solutions to truly help those in need. Unraveling the Federal Reserve's impact. Imagine a family granted the power to print their nation's entire money supply, increasing it as they wish to pay off their debts or indulge in luxury items. While this scenario sounds far-fetched, it mirrors the function of the U.S. Federal Reserve, the Fed. As the organization controlling the dollar supply, the Fed abets inflation and economic recession, thus perpetuating the boom and bust cycle. By expanding the money supply and enabling banks to profit through more loans, businesses invest in capital goods, and consumers receive higher wages. However, the cycle takes a downturn when debt repayments start and inflation hits once more. Envision a scenario where an average family, the Joneses, are authorized by the government to print their country's entire money supply. Delighted, they use the money to pay off debts and purchase luxury items, inadvertently contributing to an overall increase in the country's funds. As this translates into higher consumer goods prices, it creates an illusion that people are now wealthier. In the U.S., the real-life equivalent of the Joneses is the Federal Reserve, commonly known as the Federal. However, the organization doesn't generate money as overtly as its fictional counterpart. Instead, it resorts to devious methods that are often harder to comprehend, including controlling the total dollar supply and upholding a 6-to-1 ratio of writing checks or bank demand deposits to physical money reserves. In simpler terms, banks can lend 6 times the actual amount of money they possess, leading to a potential economic calamity if every account holder demands their money in cash simultaneously. The concept of inflation is central to understanding the economic boom and bust cycle. The Fed's control over the money supply enables them to manipulate banks into granting more loans at a low interest rate. This arrangement encourages businesses to invest in capital goods like factories and increases workers' wages. Consequently, the expanded money supply results in a rise in consumer goods prices. However, the situation doesn't last forever, as banks eventually need to recover debts to replenish their reserves. This triggers an economic depression, and the Fed bails out the banks to prevent them from collapsing, inadvertently inflating the currency further. Although this increases the government's revenue, it leaves the majority of the population at a disadvantage. Unfortunately, the cycle seems to be unending, as the money supply never decreases, and prices never fall. Privatizing public services. Envision a world where the government no longer provides public services like roads, police, and courts. Instead, these services are privatized, resulting in a free market that drives efficiency, safety, and cost savings. Landlords band together to own and maintain roads. Private police ensure street safety, and privatized courts help settle disputes. In this society, individuals and businesses have incentives to adhere to the law and maintain a good reputation, fostering a more effective and self-regulating system without the need for state interference. Unleash capitalism for conservation. Environmental conservation has evolved into a critical concern in our era, but the solution to this issue may lie in the same force that is often criticized for causing it, capitalism. Before the rise of capitalism, only around 1 million Native Americans survived on a subsistence level, while it now supports hundreds of millions of people in North America, enjoying an elevated standard of living. Free markets have the potential to tackle resource scarcity and pollution efficiently, as long as the government doesn't interfere in the process. The power of free markets within the framework of capitalism can effortlessly mend the environmental damage instigated by governments. A clear example of the market's conservation success lies in the world of copper extraction. Mining corporations adhere to supply and demand principles, which not only motivate them to conserve the resources but also maintain a balance in extraction rates to gain profits. However, an opposite scenario is seen when it comes to timber, an industry predominantly controlled by the government. State-owned forests in the western United States and Canada are leased to private timber entities that are permitted to exploit the resource but never to own it. This condition creates no financial motivation for businesses to conserve and sustain the forests, focusing only on immediate profit generation. Privatization of forests, as well as implementation of economic incentives for companies, could help preserve these natural resources. This very principle could also be applied to tackle pollution. For instance, if General Motors owned the Mississippi River, they would be highly motivated to maintain its cleanliness. Should another party pollute the river, a lawsuit would follow swiftly. Furthermore, since the state manages sewage disposal through sewage companies, most people have no incentive to invest in environmentally friendly alternatives, like eco-toilets that eliminate waste without polluting water sources. By allowing capitalism to play its natural role in resource management, we can harness its innate potential for conservation and environmental protection. War and the Libertarian Stance. Debunking the misconception that libertarians are merely peace-loving isolationists, their anti-war stance is rooted in the non-aggression axiom. In an ideal libertarian world, there would be no wars or foreign policies to wage them. The goal is for states to minimize interference in other states and limit aggression to their own populations. Modern warfare, unlike Middle Ages combat, involves mass civilian casualties. While the right to self-defense is upheld by libertarians, it shouldn't necessitate conscription, taxation, or aggression. The only potentially acceptable warfare for libertarians is guerrilla warfare, where civilians organize against their state's offenses. Libertarians are often mislabeled as isolationists or peace-loving hippies due to their anti-war stance. However, their opposition to war is an extension of their perspective on the non-aggression axiom. This principle maintains that states should interfere minimally in the affairs of other states and confine their aggression to their population. Ideally, if every country adhered to libertarian values, war would rarely, if ever, happen. There would be no foreign policies since nations and governments as we know them would cease to exist. Realistically, though, states as they exist today have a monopoly over violence within their societies, and the libertarian objective is to encourage states to prevent wars and limit aggression. Modern warfare, in contrast to the Middle Ages, affects civilians to a much larger extent, involving mass murder due to advanced weaponry and nationalism. During medieval times, war primarily involved two armies, excluding the civilian population from participating. Some argue that intervention by a third party in the face of an unjust attack is acceptable, comparing it to a street mugging. However, in state aggression, both sides expose their populations to harm. Thus, the appropriate analogy would be the bombing of a city block, with thousands of innocent casualties as a result. Libertarians may find guerrilla warfare, where civilians unite against their state's offenses, more acceptable due to its grassroots nature. They support the right to self-defense but stand against conscription, taxation, and aggression to achieve it.
In For a New Liberty, Rothbard elaborates on the foundational principles of libertarianism and how its ideas have evolved over time. At its core lies the non-aggression axiom, which dictates how libertarians approach issues like property rights, education, and welfare. Throughout the book, we see the dangers of the state's involvement in our lives, as well as the benefits that a fully free market could offer. From privatizing streets to re-evaluating the role of the state in environmental issues and foreign relations, Rothbard's work prompts us to rethink our understanding of liberty and its potential in contemporary society. Through this summary, we hope you've gained new insights and perspectives on the captivating world of libertarian philosophy.